Haru groaned as he stirred awake, the warmth of silk sheets pressing against his skin. For a moment, he thought it was still night, and maybe he'd drift back into sleep. But something was off. His bed didn't feel right. The scent of lavender lingered in the air. Expensive, not the cheap detergent his roommate used. He blinked and sat up slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through embroidered curtains. What the... This wasn't his room. The bed beneath him was massive, draped in deep crimson sheets with pillows embroidered in gold. His hand sank into the fabric. It was absurdly soft, like it belonged to a palace, not his dingy apartment. Confused, Haru swung his legs over the side of the bed, and the moment his feet hit the cool marble floor, an unsettling feeling crept over him. His gaze landed on a mirror hanging on the opposite wall. For a split second he thought someone else was in the room, but the figure staring back at him had silver hair that shimmered in the dim light, a sharp jawline, and piercing blue eyes. It was not his reflection. "No way," Haru whispered, stumbling toward the mirror. He touched his face. Well, the face staring back at him, and felt smooth, aristocratic features under his fingertips. His black hair was gone, replaced by silky, silver locks that fell past his ears, and those eyes, those cold, striking eyes. It hit him all at once. This is Caden Albrecht." His voice trembled. "I've transmigrated into his body." The name alone sent a wave of panic through him. He'd spent countless hours reading the novel Chains of Fate, the same novel where Caden Albrecht was the villain. No matter how many times Haru read it, the ending was always the same. Caden died, alone, unloved, and betrayed. His downfall was inevitable, written into the plot like a curse. Haru staggered back from the mirror, heart racing. This couldn't be real. How could he, a nobody, wake up in the body of a fictional villain? A sharp knock at the door made him jump. "Your Highness, the council meeting starts shortly," came a voice from behind the heavy oak door. "I suggest you make haste." The door opened without waiting for a response, and a stern-faced servant entered, bowing slightly. His expression was neutral, but his eyes flickered with something close to impatience. "Your Highness," the servant repeated, "you mustn't be late again. The council will not tolerate it." Haru swallowed hard, trying to piece together his thoughts. The council? Right. Caden was supposed to attend some meeting today, wasn't he? It was one of the earlier events in the book, a minor detail, but one that set the stage for Caden's eventual downfall. Right, Haru mumbled, shifting awkwardly in place. "I'll get ready." The servant gave a curt nod, clearly unimpressed, and left the room without another word, closing the door behind him. Haru let out a shaky breath and leaned against the edge of the bed. "What the hell am I supposed to do now?" he muttered under his breath. He couldn't just follow the original storyline. Caden was destined to become the villain everyone hated, and his fate was sealed by the hero, Lord Jace Valerian. If Haru didn't change something soon, he would be heading straight for the guillotine, or worse. And then it hit him. I need to survive. That's all that matters. If I can rewrite Caden's story, I might have a chance. But surviving wasn't going to be easy. Caden wasn't just hated by the hero. Half the court despised him. His reputation was already in shambles, and any misstep could push things further off the rails. Still, Haru had read the novel so many times that he knew the characters and events by heart. If anyone could rewrite Caden's fate, it was him. But where did he even begin? He glanced back at the mirror, meeting those unfamiliar blue eyes once more. "All right, Haru, you can do this," he whispered to himself. "Just stay calm. Don't act suspicious." Simple enough, right? Dressed and somewhat composed, Haru made his way through the palace halls, following the servant who led him to the council chamber. As they walked, Haru tried to ignore the curious glances from passing attendants and guards. Everyone seemed tense around him, as if they expected him to lash out at any moment. Caden's reputation really is terrible, isn't it? Haru thought grimly. No wonder people hate him. When they reached the grand double doors of the council room, the servant stopped and bowed. "The council awaits, Your Highness," he said stiffly before pushing the doors open. Haru took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was filled with nobles seated around a long table. At the head of the room sat a tall figure dressed in sleek black armor with a white cape draped over his shoulders. His presence was commanding, his expression unreadable. Haru's heart skipped a beat. Lord Jace Valerian, the hero of the novel. Jace's dark, stormy eyes locked onto Haru the moment he entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. There was no kindness in those eyes, only suspicion and a cold, calculating gaze. Crap, he already hates me. Haru forced himself to walk forward, keeping his expression neutral. He had to be careful. One wrong word could set Jace off, and Caden's tragic fate would unfold much sooner than expected. "Prince Caden," Jace said, his voice low and deliberate. "How kind of you to join us, this time." Haru bit his tongue. In the novel, Caden and Jace had been enemies from the start. Caden's arrogance and manipulations only pushed Jace further toward hatred. But if Haru wanted to survive, he couldn't play the villain's role anymore. "I apologize for the delay," Haru said calmly, bowing slightly. "It won't happen again." Jace raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the unexpected politeness. A murmur of confusion spread through the council members. This wasn't the Caden they knew. Haru felt their eyes on him, but he stayed focused on Jace. "I need to earn his trust, or at least keep him from killing me on sight." The hero studied him in silence for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. "See that it doesn't." Haru exhaled, feeling as if he'd narrowly dodged a sword to the throat. As the meeting dragged on, Haru stayed quiet, listening carefully to the discussions about the kingdom's affairs. He didn't dare contribute. Caden had never cared about such matters, and it would raise too many questions if he suddenly showed interest. But every now and then Haru felt Jace's gaze flicker toward him. The hero was watching him closely, as if trying to figure out what game he was playing. Haru's heart pounded every time their eyes met, but he kept his expression calm. By the end of the meeting, he'd managed to avoid any disasters, and the council was dismissed. As the nobles filed out, Haru turned to leave, hoping to make a quiet escape. But just as he reached the door, a hand clamped firmly on his shoulder. "Caden," Jace said quietly, his voice unreadable. "A word." Haru froze. This wasn't part of the novel. Haru's heart pounded in his chest. He turned slowly to face Jace, forcing himself to stay calm despite the hero's intense gaze. His mind raced, trying to remember if there was ever a scene in the novel where Jace cornered Caden after a council meeting. But no, this was new, completely off script. "Stay calm," Haru told himself. "This is your chance to steer things away from disaster." The other nobles had cleared the room, leaving only the two of them standing under the vaulted ceiling. Jace's hand remained on Haru's shoulder, firm but not hostile, more like a warning. Jace's deep voice cut through the silence. "You seem different." Haru swallowed. "Different?" Jace's sharp eyes narrowed, scanning him with suspicion, as if trying to peel away a mask. Less arrogant, more cooperative. Haru offered a small, hesitant smile. "Maybe I've just realized that being difficult isn't worth the trouble." Jace didn't respond immediately, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, Haru thought he saw a flicker of confusion, or perhaps curiosity, pass through the hero's usually cold expression. "He's trying to figure me out," Haru thought nervously. "He expects Caden to act like a scheming villain, but I need to keep him off balance." After a tense silence, Jace finally released his shoulder and stepped back. "If this is a trick, I'll find out," he said coolly. "Don't think I'll let my guard down just because you've decided to play nice." Haru gave a shallow bow. "Understood." As Jace turned and walked away, his white cape trailing behind him, Haru let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Well," he thought, At least I survived the first encounter. But surviving wasn't enough. He needed to earn Jace's trust, or at least make sure the hero didn't see him as a threat. If things followed the original plot, Jace would soon turn on him, and that was a death sentence waiting to happen. Haru rubbed his temples. He needed a plan, and fast. Later that evening, Haru found himself wandering through the palace gardens, trying to clear his thoughts. The scent of roses and night-blooming jasmine filled the air, and the cool breeze was a welcome relief after the tension of the council meeting. He sat down on a stone bench, resting his chin on his hand. Okay, first things first. I need allies. I can't survive here alone. The problem was, Caden had burned almost every bridge imaginable. His father, the king, was distant and disappointed in him. The nobles either feared or despised him. And Jace? Well, Jace was supposed to be his mortal enemy, destined to bring about his downfall. But what if I can change that? Haru wondered. In the novel, Caden had never tried to be anything other than a villain. He pushed people away, believing that was the only way to protect himself. But what if Haru took a different approach? What if he tried to understand the people around him, especially Jace? Before he could think further, the sound of footsteps on gravel made him sit up. Someone was coming. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, and Haru's heart sank. It was Jace. Of course, Haru thought, just when I needed some time alone. Jace approached him, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You're out late, Prince Caden," he remarked. Haru gave a nonchalant shrug. "Couldn't sleep." Jace tilted his head slightly, as if weighing whether or not to believe him. Then, to Haru's surprise, the hero sat down on the bench beside him. The silence between them stretched, heavy and awkward. Haru shifted nervously, unsure of what to say. Finally, Jace broke the silence. "You've been acting strange all day." Haru blinked. "Strange?" Jace glanced at him out of the corner of his eye. Less cruel, more thoughtful. He paused. "It doesn't suit you." Haru chuckled softly, though his heart raced. Maybe it's time for me to change. Jace gave him a skeptical look, but there was no malice in his gaze. Just curiosity. And that was new. This is my chance, Haru thought. I need to plant the seeds of doubt. If Jace stops seeing me as an enemy, I might just survive. I know I've made a lot of mistakes, Haru said quietly, playing the part of a remorseful prince. But I don't want things to stay that way. Jace studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he stood up and turned to leave. Haru's heart sank. Did I blow it? But just before Jace disappeared into the shadows, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. Don't expect forgiveness, he said, his voice low, but perhaps I'll give you a second chance. Haru sat frozen, stunned by the unexpected words. A second chance, he thought. Maybe, just maybe, I can change things after all. The next few days passed in a blur of tense meetings and quiet observations. Haru kept his head down, carefully avoiding conflict, and trying to learn as much as he could about the palace politics. He had to be careful. Every interaction was a potential trap, and he couldn't afford to make enemies. To his surprise, Jace's attitude toward him seemed to shift. The hero no longer glared at him with open hostility, though there was still a guardedness in his eyes. One evening, Haru found himself helping a young servant who had tripped and spilled wine across the banquet hall floor. It was a small, kind gesture, something that Caden, in the original story, would never have bothered with. But as Haru knelt beside the servant, helping him gather the scattered goblets, he felt someone watching him. He looked up and found Jace standing in the doorway, his dark eyes fixed on him with an expression Haru couldn't quite read. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jace gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and walked away without a word. What was that about? Haru wondered, his heart racing. It was a small moment, barely significant, but it felt like a turning point. Maybe, Haru thought, just maybe, I can rewrite this story after all.